Good morning. Well, probably it's good morning for some of you. It's good morning for me. It's probably good evening for many of you, or good afternoon. Welcome to our class today, everybody. I am Elliot Friesenmeyers. I am the IELTS teacher at Magoosh, and I see people still joining on our Zoom call. Magoosh students, welcome to all of you. As always, good to see you here. I see lots of familiar names on the list today. Hi, Marco. Good afternoon to you. I see some new names as well. That's wonderful. So welcome to all of you. These classes are sort of webinar style classes for those of you who are new that we run on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we have Conversation Club. So if you haven't come to Conversation Club, I encourage you to check it out, even if you're a little worried about what it sounds like. It's a place where we can practice speaking with each other, especially questions related to the IELTS speaking test. So it's a good chance to practice your speaking and to do it with somebody you don't know, a new partner. And I give feedback to some folks throughout the sessions. So it's a good opportunity to sort of build your courage a little bit for the IELTS speaking test. Anyway, that's on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. So if you haven't come to that yet, I'd encourage you to do that. Today, also welcome to all of you out there on YouTube. We're letting you look in these days on our live classes. If you have questions and comments, you can put them in the chat. I do need to sort of focus on the Zoom call and the Magoosh students who are in here, but I will also try to look at that as well out there on YouTube, and you can kind of follow along with what we're doing. I'll share any resources I share, I'll share over for all of you as well out there on YouTube. So welcome to everybody out there as well. So let's see, today I've got to record this session to make sure we get it on the dashboard for all of you. One moment, let me get this recording. Right. There we go. So we're going to focus today on academic task 1 writing. Okay, so any of you out there tuning in, if you are taking the general training test, you're welcome to stay. But everything we talk about here today is going to be for the academic IELTS exam. All right, so just keep that in mind, if you're only going to take the general training test, you will not see this kind of question that we are looking at today. We had a lesson for all of you last week on Thursday for general training task 1. So that Magoosh students, if you registered for that, then you can see the recording of that if that's what you intended to see. But we're going to focus on academic task 1 today with lots and lots of stuff to look at. We've got a very full agenda for the class. We're going to first do a little bit of quick review on some of the basics about task 1, really quick. We've got Magoosh students, we've got lessons in the product for you to take a look at, recorded lessons, lots of stuff there that will give you the background you need, but we want to go quickly over some of the key strategies. And then we're going to run quickly through a series of example questions and look at some sample responses. We won't have time to really dig in deep to the first ones we look at today because we're going to just use them to look at some general qualities of task 1 writing that you should be aware of. But of course, I'm going to share all of the sample questions and sample responses with you. There's a resource, actually, you can find them on our blog, so that's good. Also, I will share, Magoosh students, I will put the PowerPoint slides that we look at today on your dashboard with the recording, so you can see, you'll be able to click in there and open these up. So even though we go a little quickly at the beginning, these will all be there for you to analyze and look at later on if you want to. But then at the end of the lesson, we're going to stop and really slow down on one sample question, and we're going to do some work together to think about planning a response and applying some of the principles that we talk about. So I'm going to move a little quickly through questions at the beginning, and then at the end, we're going to slow down. Okay, so if we start spending a lot of time on the questions at the beginning of the class, I may just say, okay, we're going to get to this later on, and we'll dig in deeper later on. Okay, so I also, though, I don't want to move too fast. If you have questions, we want to talk about them, of course. If you have questions today, I've turned off the microphones for participants. I'd really strongly prefer using the chat for communication during these classes. It just helps things move a little smoother. Okay, so if you have questions or responses to questions I ask and stuff like that, I'll put them in the chat today. All right. Okay, so let's see. We've got a lot to cover. Let's dig in to academic task 1 here today. Oops. All right. So as you're probably aware, let's just start really at the basics here, but move quickly, because I assume you've got some background at this. As you probably are aware, task 1 involves, it's a 20-minute, ideally you'll spend 20 minutes on this task, and you're going to be presented with some visual information, okay? And the visual information will be one of these types, okay? There are different types of information that you might be provided. You might see pie charts, bar charts, line graphs, tables with information on them. You could have a question with one visual. That happens a lot. You could have a question that has 2, and you need to make comparisons between the 2. That's possible. Okay, but it's going to be, everything's going to be related to a general theme that's presented to you. We'll take a look at some sample questions in just a moment. And then you're going to have to respond to these visuals. Another type of visual that you might get are maps and diagrams. So we could see time-lapse maps, and that's typically where you've got, let's say, a map of a town or a downtown area in like 1980, and then you look at the same town in the year 2000, and you're supposed to report about what's different, what's changed, and what are the major differences between the 2 visuals that you see. Okay, that's a common type. And then there's a process diagram. We're going to look at some samples of these things. In my experience, I think the students have a little more trouble at first with the maps and diagrams questions, but as we're going to see in this lesson, the approach you take to responding to any of these types of visuals is basically essentially the same. Okay, there are some differences, some small differences in the things you're going to report about, but overall it's very similar across all of these types of questions. And that's what you're going to see later in this lesson when we look at sample essays, some really good, high quality sample essays for each of these types of questions. You're going to see that the approach is very similar. Okay, so just trust me on that. We'll get to that in just a little bit. For now, we're just talking about it in general. But one final point here, really important. So for task 1, academic, this is an academic exercise, and you are supposed to show what they're looking for you to do is to show that you can report about information that you see on the visuals. You can look at the visuals, figure out what's important to write about, and then you can write about factual information in a style that's much like a simple report. Okay, so why that's important? This is very different exercise than task 2. In task 2, you're going to have to provide your personal perspective on a topic. In task 2, they're going to give you a question. You're often going to, if it's not your opinion, you're at least going to have to analyze something and present what you think about it. For task 1, you're not really supposed to present your personal viewpoints on anything. Okay, you're not supposed to make guesses. You're not supposed to think about what's going to happen in the future or make predictions. Okay, you're simply supposed to look at the visual information and report about what's there factually. Okay, so it is a very unusual exercise. This is probably not something you typically do. Maybe even in your own language, you may not do this kind of thing very much. Some of you might, if you're in the sciences or in other disciplines where you have to write a lot of factual reports, maybe this feels very comfortable. But I think for a lot of folks, this might be kind of a new exercise. So we have to think about how to approach it. Ramon asks, how usual are maps and diagram questions? I would say that we see them, these types that you see on the screen, I think they are equally likely to be presented. I do think over time they might go one direction or the other more, but I think you should consider each of these equally likely to be on your test that you're going to take. I think they deserve equal attention as you're studying, okay? I wish we could know exactly what kind you're gonna get. That would make studying a lot easier. I think it's important to study equally for all of these types of questions, okay? Because I think they've come up pretty regularly, even these maps and diagram ones even, okay? So let's take a look here. Now, we're gonna go quickly here at first, as I said in the introduction, and then we're going to look at just a really basic overview of the strategy. And then later on, we're going to unpack it a little more after we look at some sample questions. All right, so here's where I'm going to ask everybody to kind of have some patience because we're going to go through some sample questions. I'm going to ask you to look at them and think about them, but I do want to move quickly through this first part. And so we have enough time to get to the really important stuff later on where you are going to do some thinking and some responding about some questions here. Okay. Good. All right, Amitabh, I see your question there. Let's hang off on that question just a moment. Okay, Amitabh, let me hold on that one because we can take a look at some sample essays and we'll look at it. Amitabh's question for everyone, if you're not seeing it in the chat or for those of you on YouTube, is which tense are we supposed to use? Which verb tense are we supposed to use for writing overview or body paragraphs? Okay, well, let's take a look at that, all right? Because the answer is there's not one tense that we can say, but we can figure out what ought to be there by looking at the question itself. And so that's a good question, but I can't give you a single answer. We're gonna look at the sample responses in just a little bit, okay? All right. Very quickly, let me first of all share some stuff. I want to share some things with all of you. Okay, here are a bunch of resources for today. If you spent time on our blog, these are mostly Magoosh resources here today, but there is a nice IELTS resource in there for you as well. And the sample essays and questions that we look at today, there are links to them here on our blog. Okay, so you can open these up from here. You could even, if you're on your computer, you could even open up some of the sample things as we're looking at them in class. I think that might be a good idea. So let me share these resources with you here. There we go. So everybody's got the link to the resources. All right, you can open those. I see people getting in there. Good. Last week, I shared a resource and I didn't set the permissions correctly. And what that meant is that I got like 50 emails about wanting access to the document. So I'm going to try not to make that mistake again. Okay, so some resources, excuse me. Up here at the top are the things we're going to probably mention most of these in class today. All right, but here we have, especially if you have not yet dug into the Magoosh lessons or our blog resources covering the strategies and approaches to task one, I think this would be, after today's lesson, I think it would make a lot of sense to spend some time looking through these resources. Okay, sample questions. We've got this resource here in the middle that is going to be very useful for giving an overview on the approach that we have. So I'm going to talk about these things today, but I know that many of you also benefit from hearing it from me, hearing it on your lessons, but then also reading things because that will help you learn it more. Okay, so here is some reinforcement, some additional material for all of you to take a look at. During the lesson, that's fine, or afterwards as you're trying to follow up and really drive home the things that we're talking about today. Okay, so I've got this up here. Again, if you're on your computer, you might want to pull up some of the resources as we're talking about them. You don't have to, but that could be a good thing to do. All right, so here's what we're going to talk about here today. Here's what I want, as we're looking at the sample essays and the sample questions that we're about to dive into. here's what I want us to first of all talk about. One of the big things I want everybody to walk away with after today's lesson is a general sense of the overall structure of a task 1 essay that applies for all essay types that you might see. Okay, there is a predictable approach, and the better you get at mastering it, the better you're going to get at identifying information that you need to select from the visuals to write about, and then the better you're going to get at actually putting those details into an organized little report for task 1. Okay, so we're going to focus on this generally at first, and then later in the class I'm going to ask you to practice it. All right, so the general approach we're going to start with. The first thing you need to do is to think of a way to introduce the visuals that you see. You're going to see a chart, a graph, a map, or some combination of two things. And you need to provide a sentence or two at maximum introducing what you see there. Okay, and we're going to talk about how to do that in just a moment. Then you need to take a look at the visual and decide, make some decisions. What kind of story are the visuals presenting? What is the overall picture of the information provided in the visuals? Is there a general trend? Okay, we don't want to look at details. We don't want to look at very specific numbers. We just want to look at overall, what story do the visuals tell us? Okay, and that is going to be a second paragraph that you write. This introduction is the first one. The summary is the second one. That's often called the overview paragraph. And this is where you need to really present that overall picture of what's there. And then you have a last part where you can write one or two more paragraphs where you unpack what you said in part 2. By unpacking, I mean, now I've identified in the second paragraph what the overall story is, and now I need to go in paragraphs 3 and possibly 4, and we can talk about decisions about writing 3 or 4 paragraphs later on when we look at the example essays. But here is where we need to talk about the relevant details that show detailed information that support the ideas you talked about in the summary. Okay, this is all very theoretical. Okay, I understand. That is a lot to think about there, especially if this is new to you. For others of you, I think you might be familiar with this, and maybe what I'm saying is not new at all. All right, but what's going to be beneficial for us is to take a look at this closely in a few questions. I want us to all look at some sample questions together to see how this approach looks in a really, really good essay. Okay, so, finally, I forgot about at the end then, it's optional. If you have time, you can write a brief summary, sort of conclusion sentence at the bottom, but I think that's optional. The most important parts are 1, 2, and 3. Okay, and if you have time and you want to restate the main viewpoint of the visuals that you're looking at, you would write a little conclusion here based on the overview, and you'd want to paraphrase yourself. All right, we'll take a look at that a little bit, but I think that part is not absolutely necessary to score really, really well on task 1. Okay, so I'm going quickly here, but I want to get into this. I think this overview stuff is very theoretical. We want to look at things practically. So here we go. Oops, let me make sure. Yeah, okay, you can see all of that. Well, I think, all right, so let's take a look at this question. We've got a bar chart question. All right, we're gonna think about this a little bit. First of all, let's read it, and we'll just read it together. So at the top, it says, the chart below gives information about the ratio of income to spending in dollars by Americans by age range in 2013. Okay, so that's a big mouthful. That's a big mouthful to say. Let's look at down below though. All right, so We're supposed to summarize the information. This is just something you always see on these task one responses. All right, and then let me see, I've got to pull mine up just a little bit. I don't think you can see that. Okay, so then we want to look at the information here down in the visual. We've got some categories that we need to take in. We've got income here, what people earn, and at the bottom we've got expenditures. Okay, so the dark blue is income and the light blue is expenditures, two categories. So what people earn and what people spend. Those are the two things we're looking at, the two colored bars. And then, as suggested up here in the sort of summary sentence of what we're seeing, we've got a range of money. Okay, this is the amount of money. And along the bottom, we've got age range. All right, so when we come to a new visual, we need to take all of that in. We need to look at all the categories there and understand what we're looking at. That's part one, okay? There shouldn't be anything that is too extremely difficult to pull in and comprehend, but we do need to take it all in and kind of process. All right, here are the categories I'm supposed to think about. And now I need to think about, okay, what is the overall picture here I'm looking at? What does the visual show? And then we need to come up with what is the overall story that the visual is telling? What is the big picture? Okay, so we talked just a moment ago about our general approach. We need to introduce the visuals, okay, and then we need to summarize the overall information that's there, okay? So, oops, let's not get to the sample yet. What do we have here? What should we pull out and what should we talk about? Well, we've got critical information up here. I'm just going to walk us through this first one, and then I'm going to ask you more and more throughout the lesson to help me out and to provide some feedback. But and you're always going to get a kind of summary sentence up here. Okay, so in order to present what the visuals are showing, one of the key things you need to be able to do in this first paragraph that you're writing, this one, okay, is to paraphrase what you see here, right? We need to take this language and put it into our own words. And that's not easy. That takes language skill, okay? But that's the challenge. That's what you need to work on as you're practicing for these part one questions, is your ability to put these words that you see on the question into your own language. And that summary will be basically your first paragraph. You will be able to say what the visuals are showing by taking all of this and putting in your own language. Okay, we're going to look at an example of that in just a second. But then we need to in order to provide a good overview, we need to next take a look at the picture, what does the information show? Okay, so all of you take a second here. I want to invite you into the process just a little bit. Take a look at the numbers here and take a look at the bars that we have here. If you had to say, in general, overall, what is the general trend of the information that you see here? What would you pull out? Take a second and look at it. You can put it in the chat if you want to. If you can write a full sentence, that's great. If you just want to put a bullet point and mention it, that's fine. But I'd like for you to try. Overall, what does this visual tell us? What is the story that the numbers are showing here? Okay, take a second. I'll be quiet for about 30 seconds here and let you think about it, okay? Okay, I'm seeing some stuff come in. Good. Good. I'm seeing some good stuff come in. I'll give you another couple of seconds. Everybody come in, and Gandali, I see your point as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Comparative between the amount of good. Okay, great. If you want to keep, if you're in the middle of writing something, go ahead and hit send. I do want to see it, but I see some good stuff coming in. Okay, so yes, if we take a step back and look at the overall picture, well, if we had to look at, like, so if you're thinking about, you know, if you're thinking about looking at maybe a picture, a landscape, and you take a step back, right? You can see the whole thing, but you don't focus on any details. Then what is the big thing that we're noticing? And I see several of you in the chat talking about how there is an overall, we see this rise and fall, right? We see that income and expenditures across these age groups rises and falls predictably for both categories. That is an interesting thing here, right? And within that trend, what is there any sub-trend? Is there anything, if we had to compare income versus expenditures, does one go, are they exactly the same? Or what's the difference between the two, if there is any? Do we see any difference there? For whom, for which category is the rise and fall a larger trend, that it is a more extreme trend from one to the other? Well, we can see easily that for income, okay, income even starts below expenditures. That's a problem. Okay, you don't want to do that. These 25-year-old folks are spending more than they earn, right? So maybe they've got credit cards or something like that, right? And so income is down here, but then look at that spike. It rises quickly, levels off, and goes down. Whereas expenditures, it also has an upward and then falling trend, but it is much more gradual than income, the income trend is, right? So that's interesting. And that is an important point to note. Now, others of you are noticing details that are also really important, right? We are focusing on 1 year here. So we need to make sure that this is represented accurately. This is, we're thinking about age groups and income. Sometimes bar charts, you start looking at it and you're thinking, oh, this is a change over time or something like that. No, this is a 1 year time period. And I saw some people mentioning that as a key piece in your comment that you put in the chat. That's important also. Okay, I'm taking now let me take another look at folks who added things. Good, the graph is showing cash flow between American population during their lives. Yes, kind of, but it's not during their lives. It is 1 year, and it is different groups during 1 year, different age groups. Okay, so we don't want to mix it up. It's not like we're following people throughout their lives. Okay, we are looking at 1 year, and we're looking at different age groups in that 1 year. So that's something to notice here. Okay, good. Expenditures are more prominent. Eduardo, you just realized that I'm not sitting. Yes, I'm at a standing desk. You're right. That's correct. If I sit all day, I get really sore because I'm old. Okay, so anyway, good job highlighting these things. Yeah, so let's take a look now. Again, don't get frustrated with me. I'm going to move quickly here, and then we're going to dig in deeply to a specific question later on. All right, so I do want to move through some sample responses here, though, so you can take a look. Okay, so, and again, if you have, we're going to talk about these here, but let's see, which one do we have? Charts and tables. Oh, shoot. I hope this one is up here. I'm looking for, The correct one. Yes, there we go. If you click on this first sample, oops, this first sample one that's here, I don't want to put a comment, thank you, Google, then you can open this up. If you're on a computer, you could look at this on another screen while we're talking about the sample essay if you like. Okay, but let's take a look at a sample essay. So first of all, remember our what we're looking at in the description of the visual in the question, we need to paraphrase that. So we see that here. This graph compares how much Americans spent to how much income they made in 2013 by age group. Okay, that's a paraphrase of this. The chart below gives information about the ratio of income to spending in dollars by Americans by age range in 2013. Okay, so we're using a little bit different language. We've mixed up some of the order of the sentence. We've used some new grammar, and where possible, we've done a little paraphrasing there. Okay, this is your challenge. This is what you want to try to do for all of your task 1 questions that you're responding to. All right, but now, that's hard because the language of paraphrasing is difficult. We can't get into deeply here the strategies on paraphrasing. Actually, we have a whole other lesson on that topic that you might want to check out. But that is tough only because the paraphrasing is tough. Now let's look at what we just talked about on the idea of selecting the critical information to report about. So let's take a look at the overview paragraph that we have here. The data shows an overall rise and fall in both income and spending between young, middle-aged, and older Americans. Okay, so here, an overall rise and fall in both income and spending. Okay, this is big trend number 1 that we looked at, right? That there's this curve in the data from young to old, up to down, okay? And we need to report about that. And the category in which it changes is not time, okay? It's not through the lifespan of a person. It is by these categories that we have kind of identified. And we've split them apart in this description to young, middle-aged, and older, okay? And that's, that is not necessarily the way it's divided exactly on the chart, but in general, that's how the information goes. The young, the middle-aged, and the older have unique and identifiable qualities in this visual. And so it makes sense to split them apart as an age group and analyze it that way. Okay, income rises and falls more sharply than spending. And that's that subcategory that we looked at about how, well, income goes up really sharply and falls sharply as well. But then expenditures is a little bit flatter. It's not completely flat, obviously, it follows that general trend, but that is the other sort of key thing we'd want to pull out in the visual, all right? And then down below, I would just highlight this for now. I want to keep moving through our examples, but just as you take time, if you look after our lesson today, if you analyze this essay a little bit, you're going to see that these 2 paragraphs that we have here split apart and report about the data in just slightly different ways, but they're reporting about these general trends that we identified here. So we're taking specific age ranges and we are talking about the numbers we see in the visual with specifics, okay? And we're just talking about, okay, so if we say that the young, middle-aged, and older Americans have different spending and income trends, then what are some numbers that we can pull out to support that, okay? Now, there was a good question that came to me from one of your classmates. When I said earlier in the lesson, you don't want to provide your personal viewpoint on this information. What I'm talking about there is you're not supposed to look at all of this information and try to explain why Okay, so actually I did a bad thing earlier, okay, and you don't want to do this in your essay. Remember when I was talking about, well, I guess the people who are 25 must have credit card debt, okay, and maybe that's why they spend more than they earn, okay, or maybe they have school loans, maybe they're using debt in some way. All right, that went through my mind because I'm looking at this thinking about, well, that's kind of unusual that people spend more than they earn, but actually it's not that unusual. But in your response, you don't want to make guesses and speculate and talk about reasons why things might be happening, okay? That you want to keep completely out. All we want to do is try to select the key information that's here and report about it. And that's all we need to do. If you go beyond that and provide your perspective and make guesses and predictions and analyze it, trying to explain why the numbers are as they are, that's actually a problem, okay? So I hope that makes sense. Yes, you are thinking about the visuals. You're supposed to analyze them, yes, but your analysis should be simply to identify what is the key information and to report that information. You don't want to provide your perspective, opinion, guesses, predictions, anything like that in your response, okay? So I hope that distinction makes sense here. Good. So some more questions coming in. We should also write about how the visual presents information in the first paragraph. You can, yeah, that can be a good idea. I think the key thing you want to do is to paraphrase this here. You may also write about, you know, the different categories that are here, all right? But if you notice, the sample response provides the categories of information that we are looking at in the visual already, okay? So if you want to add a little note with detail about, you know, by how they organize the different age categories or that the numbers increase by a certain amount, that's possible. It won't hurt your score, but it's not 100, it's not absolutely necessary, okay? And I don't, what I want my students to avoid is spending too much time on this introduction paragraph, just putting out little details about the specific units that are there, and more so spending their time paraphrasing that sentence in the question beautifully, and then writing a beautiful overview paragraph describing generally what those trends are. Those are the critical pieces to be able to do quickly and efficiently. And if you can do that, then you are going to have an easier time selecting the details that you write in paragraphs 3 and 4, okay? Those are the key pieces to me in scoring really high on task 1 here. Okay, so question, is it not necessary to put a conclusion or summary paragraph in task 1? No, it's not completely necessary. No, it can help you if you want to summarize the first paragraph that we have here. You can at the end, but only if you have time. Some people can get through these task 1 responses really, really quickly, and they can analyze their own writing, and they can check for errors, and they can do all of those things. And then, you know, it doesn't hurt you to put a sentence here. Or if you've written one pretty good paragraph 3, and you've done the best you can, you've got like 2 minutes left, and you don't have time to fully write a paragraph 4 that you might have planned to, that can happen too. It's unfortunate, but that can happen. Then a conclusion sentence or 2 can be a really good idea to make sure your word count gets you where you need to go. Okay, so those would be some situations where a conclusion would work, but it's not 100% necessary. And in fact, these 4 pieces that you see here, or 3 pieces, intro, paragraph, overview, and the details, either 1 or 2 paragraphs of details, those are by far the most important things that you need to have on your response, okay, way beyond your conclusion, okay? So yeah, you can score perfectly without a conclusion, if that's also what you're wondering. So anyway, it can help you if you, especially if you need to get that word count up and you've got just a short amount of time left on your response, okay? Okay, some more good questions here. What is the ideal word count in essay task 1? This one is pretty good. I think this one is around 175, something like that. I didn't put it in the word counter, but I think you should shoot for about that. About 175 is realistic. Some people are really fast writers and they can get up to 200. I've seen even more, but that it's not necessary to get that far. You want to be hitting about 165, 175, 180 in your practices, because that is a safe number. You don't want to be counting numbers, especially if you're taking the paper test. You're not going to obviously have any sense of how much you have there. So you want to make sure your practice essays are extending beyond the minimum. Okay. All right. So let's quickly now, okay, because I do, let's see, I'm going to give us a strict time limit here. I want to spend no more than about 10 minutes on this discussion here. We're going to go quickly through a couple more, and then we're going to dig in together on one specific question and think through how to respond to it, okay? Here we've got a typical map style question, okay? So we've got this place called the Sauri District in 1920. And we have the Sauri district in 2020. So 100-year difference here. All right, and our sample question says, the diagrams below show changes that have taken place in the Sauri district neighborhood since 1920. Okay, so now we're looking at a picture of 100 years ago, well, almost a little more than 100 years ago now, in 1920, and 2020, and what changes are there. Actually, I'm a little surprised the Sauri district didn't change more. It looks like it hasn't changed all that much in the last 100 years, but there are some key things there to notice. All right, so let's take another 30 seconds. Look at it. You don't have to put it in the chat this time if you don't want to. Let's just, I do want to give you some time. Look at the two maps, and then we'll look at the sample essay quickly and move on to a third one before we get to our one that we're going to work on together. Okay, so 30 seconds. Take a look at the maps. What do you notice there? What would be the information that you select to talk about? And how would you organize that information in a response? Okay, go ahead. Take 30 seconds and take a look at it. All right. What's the big picture? Yeah, okay. If you want to put something in there, that's fine. If you want to put something in the chat, that's okay. Amitabh, I see you put, there are more shops, houses, and apartments. Good, good. So what's our category there? Buildings, right? There's development of buildings. Good, okay. There are some things gone as well. Good, so the factory is replaced by office buildings, right? And there's a school in 1920, Prestwich Elementary Primary School, and now there is a petrol station, a gas station in that place. Okay, so we got some changes. All right, but a big thing is buildings, okay? There are changes to those, and that is definitely a thing we would want to write about in our overview. Okay, what else? I'm noticing there's a new bridge. Okay, Isaac, you're putting a very general, the map represents changes, excuse me, in each part of the neighborhood from 1920 to 2020. Good, that's a good general way of looking at it. And then for your overview, then we're thinking about what would be those big things. And we've said housing is one. Yes, so Vit, I see you said there's a new bridge. Yes, Yeah, let's look at that. There's a bridge. There is a petrol station. Okay, that's good. Oh, look. Yeah, this whole road has extended quite a bit. Okay, and so we see that extension there. They've removed a few trees. All right, so let's take a look now. Let's take a look at what we focused on in the sample response. Okay, so the pair of maps. Okay, so here we're reporting about the two things that we see in this visual. There are a pair of maps, two maps. Depicts change over the course of a century. We need to report about that time frame for sure, right? And that is, again, that is basically taken, it's a paraphrase of what we see here. Okay, the diagrams show the two maps depict, okay, changes over a century from 1920 to 2020 to 2020 in the Sauri district neighborhood by showing the area in 1920 and 2020. Okay, so a nice little paraphrased summary there. Now, let's look at the overview. The overall change in the neighborhood is one of growth. Aha. So if we took a step back and take a step back again, we look at this from 1,000 miles away, what we see is that from 1920 to 2020, the town, this area of the city expanded, grew. There was development of a variety of types. Okay, so we would want to report about that overall trend that we see, that this part of the city expanded with different kinds of buildings and different types of infrastructure, probably. Okay, so I think that's what they say. By 2020, there are more businesses, more housing, and greater public services. However, not all businesses and services remained intact. Okay, so here we go. A really nice overview, of what we see here. That things were added since 1920, and in the categories of businesses, housing, and infrastructure. Infrastructure, we're talking about bridges, we're talking about gas stations, things like that. We're talking about roads, okay? Those are developments that occurred in this district. Overall, that's what we see. And then we could also highlight how some things were taken away, okay? We could even mention, there are fewer trees, okay? There was, infrastructure would also be how the school expanded, okay? That would be a public resource there that became, it looks like it became bigger. We could assume that it is a development there, so an expansion, all right? Things were taken away, okay? As some people noticed that there was business that was removed here for office complexes. All right, we could go around and identify those things, but those are the big things that we see. And we want to report about them here in this overview. And then again, later on, when you are taking the time to look through these essays closely, we can see we took these categories that we talked about in our overview, and we started writing about the details related to all of those big trends that we identified in paragraph 2, okay? And pulling out things that support that viewpoint that we've taken in paragraph 2, identifying the big things that are there, okay? Good, yeah, Priscilla, I see more social amenities. Yeah, there is that. Good, yeah, so a map, all right. It's a very different type of question than our bar chart, okay, or tables or pie charts or anything else you might look at, but it is, the structure of this essay is exactly the same, okay? All right, I have another one here. Let's see, I'm being strict with my time. I really want to save enough time for us to work on this. So here we go, we've got a process diagram. My point for this one will be very similar as what we've talked about so far in the other examples. You can look at it on your own time. We've got this process here. We're looking at glass and plastic recycling. The diagram moves in this direction for, let's see, which side is this? This is plastic recycling. And then there is another process for glass recycling. And we would want to look at the overall trends, identify what's there, and then report about the details that we see. Okay, you can take a look. We've got another full essay for you to look at. And again, just a reminder, these are all over here in these resources. I'd recommend taking a look at these. Again, the point is that as we look at these visuals, the overall structure of our essay should be very similar to everything we've talked about so far in this lesson. All right. So now I want us to do some, I want to slow down. I've been talking, we have a phrase, a mile a minute for this whole time. And now I want to slow down and do some of this stuff together. Okay. So as a reminder, what we're thinking about here is this overall structure. We introduce the visuals in 1 to 2 sentences, summarize the overall information in 2 to 3 sentences, and then we highlight the most important details and trends that relate to this information we've summarized. And this can be 1 to 2 paragraphs. Typically 2 is good, but you can write one longer paragraph sometimes, especially if all the information kind of relates to the same main idea that you're talking about. That's fine. And typically we're looking at about 4 to 6 sentences total for this part, okay? And you can write an optional conclusion. Okay, and as we said earlier, only do this if you're low on word count, and all you would do is summarize the details and trends that you had talked about up here in the summary. Okay, so again, this is just here as a reinforcement, as a reminder. Let's take a look together now. Let's slow down and look at this together and think through how to respond to a question. Okay, so what I would like us to begin with is something similar to what we've done so far, but this time I want to take more time for you. I'm going to give everybody out there, let's see, I've got my nice stopwatch here, my cell phone. I'd like to give everybody about 3 minutes, okay? And in the 3 minutes, I want us to focus on one very specific thing, okay? And that thing is to go to this sentence here. Well, first of all, let's read this together. In a second, we'll read over this question together. Okay, so we don't spend our 3 minutes doing that. And then I want to go piece by piece through these parts. Okay, and for part 1, I want you to, I'm going to ask you to summarize this information that you see here and put your summary, if you choose to, you don't have to, put it in the chat for us to take a look at, okay? Then we're going to do some brainstorming and planning and thinking for the other parts of the visual that we see here after we do that, okay? So first of all, let's read this together and then I'll be quiet. So sample question number 4. The chart below gives information about the household percentage of spending on essential goods in China for the years 1995 and 2011. Okay, so I'm going to let you process that a little bit. If we have questions about what that language means in a little bit, we can talk about it, but I don't want to do it yet. I want to let you think about it and think about how you would do this. Okay, so then if we look down below, here we've got our labels here, the percentage of household budget for necessities in China. Okay, necessities, that's a nice little paraphrase of essential goods, right? And we've got our 2 years that were mentioned, 1995 and 2011. Okay, so we've got these 2 pie charts here, and then we've got the different categories. Now, I know that on this visual, it might be a little tough to get, it's black and white, and it might be a little tough to get the categories here. So if that's not perfect here, I think we can, but I think I'm looking at it now. I think you can probably get it pretty well, depending on how your screen is set up here. So anyway, I'm gonna be quiet now. We've got these categories on both years and you can compare them directly. What I want you to do first though, is to simply take 3 minutes and try to think through how would you paraphrase this statement here, selecting the key thing that you would want to use to describe this set of visuals you have, and paraphrase the language in a sentence that would work for your task 1 response. Okay, so I'm going to set the timer now. Take some time to think about it, and if you want to, put your response in the chat and we can take a look at it in just a moment. Okay, so go ahead. Why don't you do that now? Mm. Okay, that's 3 minutes. That was pretty fast, I think. And I'm not seeing any. Oh, I see it. Just a couple coming in now. You can keep working for a second. Yeah, I know you're having trouble seeing the color. I apologize here. So I think what we look at, 68% and 59% are food. Okay. Clothing is 19% and 18%. Medicine is 4% and 11%. And household goods are 9% and 12%. Okay, yeah, I know it's the shading there is kind of tough to see on my screen here. Sorry about that. Okay, I want to take a look though. We see some answers coming in. If you're still typing and you can still type while you're listening to me talk, good for you. I would have trouble doing that, but I want to keep moving here as we think about some of the responses that are coming in. Okay, so I see a few. Let me take 1 second to read through. Wow. Okay, lots of stuff coming in. Wonderful. Good. Chinese household. Ooh, okay. Yeah, one thing I'm noticing so far as I'm looking through, and I'll pull out a couple of these in a moment to comment on, but one of the things I'm noticing so far is some really strong work paraphrasing some of the key things. So figuring it right. Remember, paraphrasing. Again, we had a whole other lesson on paraphrasing, so we can't go into depth here. But with paraphrasing, we're looking at doing more than just replacing words with synonyms, right? I'm noticing that several of the responses so far are really changing around the sentence structure of what we see here, and that is a really excellent way of approaching paraphrasing, right? Because we can do things like, instead of saying in China, right, we can say things like among the Chinese population, right? And that would be a good way to change around the language that's here. Okay, it's a different kind of focus, but that's good. That is something that takes the same basic information there and says it in a different way. So the Chinese population. I'm seeing some other examples here. Let me go back here. So I'm seeing the word budget come in, right? That's a great word to add here. So the household budget. Okay, you borrowed the word household, whoever used that word term there, but budget is new, and that's good. Could we paraphrase that phrase even more? So instead of household budget, maybe it is what? If you have an idea there, we could say something like even just the personal budget or the family expenditure budget or something like that. That could be another way of paraphrasing that information. Good. Let me see. Let me take a look. The pie chart shows the increases of spending goods in China between 1995 and 2011. Okay, so goods, great. Spending goods or personal goods or household goods. If you can get rid of that word household, I guess that's better, but I like that. I'm looking at Daniel's response here to everybody now. And yeah, I like how Daniel used that word goods there in the first part. Focus on essential goods but we don't want to use the word goods again if we can, like food, clothing, medicine, and household. Okay, so goods is good. Oh, and okay. So make sure, Daniel, this is not just at you, this is for everybody. If you want to avoid repetition of words, okay, and the word goods is used down here. So we want to be careful not to use that too much. That would be one piece of advice to think about for your summary. But otherwise, I like how you're using a different sentence structure there. Let me take a look at some more. Ooh, okay, Sebastian, everybody look in the chat here. I like this one. I'll read it out for those of you watching on YouTube. The charts serve as a comparison of how much money was spent in Chinese households to cover basic needs in 1995 and 2011. That is a beautiful summary, paraphrased sentence there. That's really nice. Sebastian, that's a great one. Good job. That captures the main information. I like the paraphrase here, like we talked about earlier, a Chinese household. That's a nice way to put in those categories of information that we're looking at there. And talking about basic needs. Yes, that was really great. This is a great example there, Sebastian. So everybody in the chat can take a look at that one. Yeah. Nice. I'm seeing some really good stuff here. I'm seeing some examples are longer, some of them are shorter. Okay. I'm seeing a few where people have chosen to put in very specific details like percentages in the first paragraph. And let me just recommend that you avoid that. Okay. So we saw just a moment ago, I'm going to go back to, not to pick on you, Sebastian, but I really liked your sentence there. So Sebastian chose to include the dates because that is key information that comes from, this first sentence that we see up here. But we don't want to get into any of the percentages or any of the other detailed information yet. You want to save all of that for paragraphs 3 and 4, okay? Even your overview paragraph where we describe general trends, we want to stay away from detailed numbers and detailed points because you want to save all of that as supporting information to talk about those main points later on, okay? All right, nice job. I'm seeing some great stuff here. Anusha, I see yours, I'm reading that now. The pie chart reveals information about the important household items that people had spent on in the years 1995 and 2000 in China. Nice. Yeah, if everybody looks through there, Anusha has a nice one there. That one captures the main information we're looking at, and it doesn't get into too much depth about what we're talking about. Good. Great. Okay, and I'm seeing people putting in questions and ideas. Goods or basic needs? Yeah, basic needs. Basic needs are good. Basic essential items, is that what we say here? Yeah, essential goods. We maybe want to avoid the word essential goods. So everybody who used the word basic there, I think that's a really good choice. Basic needs, basic goods, the things they need to run their household. I mean, that's not as beautiful of a sentence, but you can really try to capture that idea in any way you can, that these are items that people spend for their lives that are really essential and basic, covering their basic needs. Okay, so these goods. Nice. Okay, now we don't have time to write a full overview of what we see here, but what I want everybody to do right now is to let's take this a step further. So we have already written an introduction here. Okay, you've got one, and again, we'll look at the sample in just a little bit. We've got a sample for you to ingest, but I want us to do this all first before we get in there. Now let's look at part two, and here's where I would invite you to write in the chat a little bullet point summary. Okay, don't write the full thing unless you're a really fast writer and you think you can get through it the whole way. Let's just take a look at now as we take a step back and look at our visuals from an airplane view. Okay, what do we see? What is the key trend that we notice? Now we're thinking about 2 years here, right? And so we're thinking about a comparison between these 2 years. We don't want to talk about progression or things like that. We want to talk about how the two are different. So in what ways are, as you look at the most general way of taking in this information, what are the key things that are there? And what would you select to write about in your overview paragraph? Okay, so let me give another, let's take 2 minutes for this, since you don't have to write out a full thing. I want you to take a look at this and just in a bullet point or a couple of words in the chat, if you want to, put in what you would choose to focus on as the main trends of these visuals that you're looking at. And I want to take a look at what you've chosen for both of these. Okay, so I'm going to start my little timer here. Let's go. Let's take a look. Okay, that was 2 minutes. I'll give you a second. Put your ideas, oops, I gotta change my screen around here, one moment. Put your ideas in the chat if you want to. Okay. Okay. Seeing some stuff come in. Okay, here's where I want to, again, I want to make sure that we are focusing on the really taking a step back and looking at things very broadly, the most obvious things about the chart. So none of these charts, so these look a little complicated and academic, but all of these charts or visuals that they present to you are going to have a noticeable big picture, okay? That is, excuse me, my voice is going out a little bit. That's not too challenging to grasp initially. So sometimes I think students get too worried about analysis and digging in deeply to the numbers to get their overview paragraph correctly. I think it should be simpler than that. And I'm seeing some responses come in that might be a little too complicated, and some that are getting closer to that idea. So in general, what do we see here? Like what are the big things? So for example, if we've got these two pie charts here, what do people spend the most on? And that answer is pretty obviously food, okay? And does that change? Is there another thing that is the highest expenditure? Well, it looks like food and clothing are the things that people spend the vast majority of their money on. And does it change that much over this time span that we're looking at here from 1995 to 2011? No, that is in general what we see. The things that people spend the least amount on are over here. So we've got medicine and household goods. Okay, good. So I'm seeing some folks who captured that. I'm seeing some folks who went too far. You don't want to go so far. If you're writing about details like the percentages of this or that thing, that's good. You've noticed that you should identify those pieces, but those are details you want to save for later. You don't want to pull those out yet in your overview, because in your overview, you need to give us the really big picture of what's there. And I would say for all of you, I'm looking now at some people are direct messaging me and some people are putting in everyone. So you can see that's great. Either one's fine. Yeah, I'm seeing some folks putting in there, good, that the overall what we see is a large amount of spend on food and clothing and a smaller amount of spend on medicine and household goods. Great. Okay, now we can take a look at, did anything, is there anything noticeable where there were differences between the two charts here? And of course there are. Now, this is where we don't want to talk yet about percentages. We just want to identify, well, okay, what went up and what went down in terms of the percentage of expenditure across these years. All right, and we can notice that. Basically, spending on food went down noticeably, but the clothing category stayed pretty flat, whereas medicine went up and household goods went up. Okay, so we don't want to get into the details of those things quite yet, but we do want to point out in general that there were some changes between some of the categories, whereas some changes were quite small. There were also some more dramatic changes in the amount of money people spent on these items here. And that level of detail is what we want to point out in our overview, that we could focus. You could mention those categories specifically if you want. We just don't want to get into the numbers yet, because those numbers are what we need to write about later on in the response. Okay, so I'm taking a look at things people said here. Oh, and some people here, some people even wrote out the full thing, okay? So let's see, Amitabh, I'm looking at yours. Good, all right, while food and clothing share a larger portion of the overall budget, medicine and household goods cover a small amount of the share compared to other years. Good. Okay, so Aslam, that was good. So everybody can look at Aslam. That was a good description of the categories that we see there. And then I would recommend that you also add something about how there were some changes between 95 and 2011 in some of these categories, okay? Because then you can support that point with details in your third and fourth paragraph, if you have a fourth paragraph there. Good. Good. I'm seeing people with percentages. Just avoid those percentages. Okay, good. I'm looking at VIT. Overall, it's quite clear from the charts that Chinese people spent less money on food and more money on medical services and household commodities in 2011 and 1995, while their expenditures on clothes remained pretty much the same. Okay, that's good. That's good. So Vit's response there. Oh, I'm sorry, Vit. That was a direct message. You may not have wanted me to read that. I apologize. Sorry about that. I try not to call out people's names when they direct message me, and I missed that this time. Sorry, Vit. But that was a good response. That was a nice response there. Okay. Thanks. Okay, I'm glad it's okay, Vit. I apologize for that. I will try to avoid that with direct messages because I assume that's what you want. You want to stay anonymous. So anyway, I will try. Okay. So now that we've done all this, then we get to this point where we can support everything we've said with details. All right, let's take a look at how that works. Okay, we've been thinking about this question deeply now. Let's take a look through the sample response. The two pie charts show differences in Chinese household spending in 4 essential categories. Okay, these categories are marked as percentages of total spending, with the differences in spending for 1995 and 2011. Just summarizing really nicely what's in the question, but then also presenting those categorical information as well from the visuals. All right, so compare this to your own, to what you just wrote. Think about this one in comparison to the ideas you presented, okay? And noticing especially that we're not pulling out little percentages and details quite yet. Okay, this essay focuses on these points. Food and clothing remain the largest categories in both years, with medicine and household goods remaining the smallest. Okay, simple. What's the biggest? What's the smallest? That's one key big picture thing from like an airplane view that we notice about the two pie charts that were there. Nonetheless, there were measurable changes in all 4 categories over the years. Changes to the household budget shares of food and medicine were particularly noticeable. Okay, so this is not my essay, somebody else wrote this, okay? But this person made the general comment that there were measurable changes in all categories in all years. Factually, that's true. If we take a look here, nothing exactly stayed the same. So that's a fair point. That's nice. I know that some of you responded that, some of the points were steady, and that's true. That's also true. As long as you don't say that something stayed exactly the same across the years, you're safe there. If you say, I think it is fair to say that, especially with clothing, that is pretty steady right there. There was not a huge change to notice there. But this person focused on how there were measurable changes in 4 categories of the 4 years, so the small difference at least. And then they wanted to point out that the changes to the household budget shares of food and medicine were the most noticeable. So they identified the biggest changes that are depicted on the chart as their overview. Okay, again, not going into depth, just presenting that airplane view of what's in the visuals, okay? Then let's look at what this author did to support those points that they just made in the overview. Both of the top two categories, clothing and food, shrank during this 16-year period. Clothing lost just 1% of its share, going from 19 to 18, while food dropped more dramatically, starting at 68, but losing 9 points. Okay, so they identified these top categories here, and then they wanted to talk about the changes that occurred during this time period, okay? In both 95 and 2011, medicine and household goods were represented the lowest and the second lowest spending categories, respectively. Still, both gained a larger share of household spending in China by 2011. Medicine jumped 7 points from 4% to 11, while household goods made a smaller but still noticeable increase from 9 to 12%. Okay, so the change there, this author chose to focus on dividing the data exactly the way they said they would up here, that we're looking at largest categories and smallest, And then we want to look at, okay, well, what were the percentage changes over time if we divide up the categories those ways? I think there could be other ways to divide up the information here, but this was a smart strategy, a smart way of being able to take what was written in the overview and support it with details selected from the visuals you see. Okay. All right. So what we have here to follow up for today, I would invite all of you. We went quickly through a lot of information. Sorry. Oh no, I want to back up here. Oh, it's not letting me. One moment. Got to get this link again. 1 second. Here we go. We went through a lot of information today, a lot of essays, and we went quickly through them. What I would recommend that you do, one of the key takeaways from today, is that you want to be able to master this kind of template that we've been talking about across the different types of essays that you're going to write, okay? I think you're going to get reinforcement for all of these ideas we've been talking about and thinking about today in these sample questions that we looked at, but also in our overview information. Here's one down here also from IELTS as well that I think is really good. So linking to that as well. I will share this for anybody who joined later on. I'm going to put, for you Magoosh students, I'm going to put this link to this document in next to the recording for when I post the recording later on in Magoosh on your dashboard. You can get there since you registered. And here, anyone who's still with us out there on YouTube, I'll put it there as well so you can get that. 1 second, let me do that. But you should spend some more time with this and analyze and think about, as you're writing your own task 1 essays, how well are you conforming to this kind of overall structure that we're just talking about. There are different ideas about ways to organize task 1 responses and present the information. But in my experience, this template is, once you master it, is really powerful at helping you save time, to provide all the information they're looking for, and to write all of that information as efficiently as possible. Okay, so there was a question earlier I promised to get to that I didn't, and that was Amitabh's question from earlier about verb tenses. The question was, which verb tense should we use in our overview? And what I hope you've noticed throughout all of the samples that we've looked at is that, each question has its own set of information that is provided, and time is often a category to consider, right? And here we are looking at information that occurred in the past, 1995 to 2011. So we are going to write about these trends, this information in the past, okay? You could, in theory, I'm sorry, this is probably visually kind of distracting, but you could, in situations like this, we didn't look at this essay closely, but you can take a look at it later on. Here we've got a process that is not time bound, okay? And so this one, I would imagine, we would use a different tense to describe. Okay, so look at the information here. The diagram reveals similarities and differences in the way that plastic and glass goods are made, recycled, and then made anew. The processes have more differences than similarities, but there are some more significant differences in the earlier stages, okay? If you notice here, logically, you should not put this isn't something that occurred in the past. This is a process that is not bound by time, is not connected to time in any particular way. So we can talk about it as though it happens, it's happening, okay? Those kinds of present tenses there. So I can't give you an answer for always use past, always use present, but you do need to focus on what is the time? Is the time from some past moment to the present? Is there no time indicated? And you need to make your choices about what tenses to include based on what the information is providing you there. I wish I could tell you always do past, always do present, always do passive voice, always do these things, but they really do depend on the information that's presented to you there, Amitabh. Okay, so that was a good question. It's not maybe a satisfying response, but that's part of analyzing these charts, and that's what IELTS is testing you on, is to see if you can make appropriate choices with things like verb tenses there. Okay. Okay, and do the rest of the paragraphs in task 1 require past tense? No, Isaac, the same response. We don't, you have to look at the time. And, so the question is then, do our body paragraphs need to be in past tense or not? Oh, I'm sorry, everybody. There we go. Okay, well, so here, if you notice in our essay, we were thinking about 95 to 2011. Everything that happened on those charts occurred in the past, since it's 2021 right now. So yes, you would want to include past tense in this particular essay. But in other essays that are not time-bound in any particular way, like that process one you could look at closely later on in your resources, that one would be present tense. You would not want to put that in past tense because there's nothing about it that's bound to specific time. If you put that information from the process diagram on recycling in the past tense, it would sound incorrect, because it would sound like that's something that used to happen in the past but doesn't happen anymore, and that's not what you're trying to communicate there. Okay. Okay. So lots of stuff here. All of you Magoo students, I'm going to put these PowerPoint slides on your dashboard. I'm going to put the recording of our session on the dashboard as well. So if you go to past, if you look at the classes from before, since you all registered, it will be there. And I'm going to put this resource sheet for you on there as well. Okay, so you can all take a look at that later on your own time. All right. I need to finish out today's session here because I got to get going, but I want to thank all of you for joining here and for digging into this task 1 material together with me. We went quickly. There was a lot to get over here. We didn't quite get through all the examples, but that's what we tried, and we made it pretty far actually. So I'm happy about that. So spend some time on this and work on it. Work on your task 1 essays. You can use this, you can practice a few and get them graded if they're really tough for you. I think that's a good use of your essay grading credits to get some feedback on this kind of stuff. And if there's anything you have questions about related to the lesson, related to the materials you're watching from videos in your practice, you can always, Magoo students, you can always write into our student help team and they'll be happy to answer your questions. Okay. Thank you all. It's great to see you as always. I hope to see a bunch of you tomorrow for Conversation Club at the same time, practicing our speaking. Okay. And I'm gonna sign off here. Okay. So we'll see you all soon. Have a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are. I hope you're having a good day, and we'll see you guys soon. Okay. Bye.